together. If we all stand together, we can do this together. If we all stand together.
This is the result of 27 years of the best effort I could have applied to a process that I truly believed in, and it failed. It's very hard to admit after 27 years that something could be that fail that badly, but it did. It was a horrible disaster because the net results speak for themselves, and we're going to talk about that. And I've got the reclaim numbers here, and for anybody who knows me, it's only been in the last year that I've been able to come around to the fact that the concept of recycle versus destruction might have been misunderstood for a long time. And when I show you the reclaim numbers and we talk about the market size and the market share, you'll understand that I didn't come to this decision or this conclusion easily. I weighed a lot of options, and I've had a lot of time to do that. And I actually love the work of recycling refrigerants. It's what got me out of bed, and I probably enjoyed it more than anything I've ever enjoyed ever. I'm not a software guy. We ended up in this spot because things were changing, and we realized that we couldn't fix the problem of refrigerant emissions by recycling more because it just wasn't happening. So as I weigh into this discussion, I really want anyone on this call to feel comfortable to challenge the questions, and not because I'm looking for confrontation, but because I'm open to a discussion. We produce and consume 600 million pounds of refrigerant here in the United States every year. All of the regulations, the Montreal Protocol, the EPA's 94 ruling, the 94 regulations, the updates in 2004, 10, and 2014 have had zero impact on emissions, none. It's never worked. We emit more refrigerant today than we ever have. Leaks have not gone down, they've gone up. I consider myself to be the type of person who likes to work on equipment, and I realize that there are just some natural things that occur that we can't stop. But there is one that we can talk about. And the reason that we're here today to discuss both the concept of destruction versus recycle, and then some options for destruction as well. But it all comes down to the following thing. When refrigerant is recovered and put into a cylinder at the end of a piece of equipment's life, where does it go? What gets done with that? And how much are we actually talking about? It's estimated that around 50 to 60 million pounds of refrigerant are recovered annually, but only, as I'm going to show you in a few minutes, only a small fraction of that actually makes it to the reclamation facilities. And so when we take a look today, I'm going to talk about this ozone depleting substance challenge. I'm going to talk about the global warming potential of some of these refrigerants. We've got a blog, and Ray's got some tutorials that he'll share afterwards. But essentially what we're talking about is phasing down refrigerants. Instead of keeping the conversation going about, the serviceability of refrigerants and the future use of refrigerants, which is important, I'm happy to have that conversation at a different time. Today is about how to draw this down, how to reduce our carbon footprint, how to reduce our refrigerant losses, and how to manage that along the way. And what are the options available? The ODS challenge is largely based on the fact that we have not produced CFC refrigerants in the United States since 1993. So there were a small amount of CFCs produced for medical device inhalers, MDIs, those things that people use to get medicine into their lungs quickly. But that's very small, and that ended in 2004. And all of those refrigerants have since been destroyed. They were not allowed to go back into the market. So the people who are on this call, and the people I imagine who are interested in this topic, are not the same people who are part of the medical device industry. So that's why we're not going to talk too much about it. Now, the refrigerants, and today we're going to talk about ozone depleting refrigerants, but really this extends out to all refrigerants. The GWP of R12 is roughly 5 tons of carbon. The GWP of R11 is roughly 2. You can see that here. So for every pound of R12 vented, there's 5 tons of carbon vented. And this is a really big number, and that's why these are so important. And if anyone's wondering, why are we talking about a material that hasn't been in production for 27 years? Well, I'll tell you, because these are the reclaim numbers that were published by EPA in July of this year. And if you'll notice in this column over here on the left, we have R11 and R12. These are the numbers from 2000 to 2020. Now, I actually have the numbers going all the way back to 1995, but I think 20 years of history is adequate to give us an understanding. So if you can see this number right here, we haven't produced R11 since 1993. We haven't installed a new R11 system since roughly 1997. That's the last year I know of a new R11 system being installed. And there may have been one after that, but it would have had to have been a system that was built before 1995. And so if we take a look at these numbers, we're still pulling out, recycling 452,000 pounds a year. And these numbers are fairly consistent. Now you'll see some bigger numbers in here, 900,000, 800,000. But the fact that 27 years later, we're still recycling over 250 tons of R11 is a sign that there are a lot of these ODS materials out there, these CFCs, these refrigerants, and those are going to be vented. Now, I'm not telling you they're going to be vented because I'm making this up. I'm telling you that because that's what the EPA has determined happens with all these refrigerants. Ultimately, the EPA determined and published a statement about 2019. Ultimately, all refrigerants are vented as it is today. So that means if you're investing big money in a reclamation project to retrofit a bunch of systems, that gas was recovered and sent back to a reclaimer. That reclaimer will clean it, and in some cases they'll resell it. Some cases they'll destroy it. Overall, it's a very small fraction of the destruction market, and only a few refrigerants merit destruction because they can generate some carbon credits, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I think this is a very powerful document because although the numbers in 2020 were only 79,000 pounds for R12, I think the number is actually much higher. I think we'll see a bigger number this year. It indicates that 27 years after final production of a material, that these materials are still in use and they're still being vented. So you can, and I made a highlight of R11, R12, and 502, the real common ones. But I want to draw your attention to the bottom right corner over here. And I want you to notice that there's been a 9% drop in the total amount of ODS type refrigerants over the last year. A 9%, not 100%, not a 50%. I mean, only a 9% reduction. All these other refrigerants have some other ozone depleting potential related to them, including R22. But that's the lion's share of this. And you'll see, though, that R22's numbers in 2020 are almost equal to the year 2000. Put this in perspective. There's about 500 to 750 million pounds of R22 installed. That's a big estimate. That's a big gap, but that's as close as we can get in functioning systems in the United States. And all we're recycling is 7 million. So it's not a big number. And then if you'll notice here, this is mixed refrigerant. So when you're collecting refrigerant and you're sending it back to a reclaimer, roughly 900,000 pounds or 6% of the total amount of refrigerant returned is going to have to be destroyed anyways and does not have a use. Some of this is R22 mixed with 410. That's a natural thing that happens when people don't have enough cylinders in the air conditioning field. If you're in the refrigeration field, mixed refrigerants are a lot more common because we have a bigger variety of refrigerants that we're working with for the most part, although that's changing in air conditioning. But it's very common in refrigeration to see a lot of mixtures, particularly with older systems. But ultimately, 6% of total is being mixed. And so that ultimately that will have to be destroyed anyway. And then the last piece I want to share with you is how, regardless of how we look at this, the total amount of refrigerant sent to reclaimers is only 15,811,000 pounds. There was a 15% drop in 2020 from 2019. This is, again, a very important number because we've seen this trend happen in the past. As the value of certain refrigerants goes up or as gases get mixed, it's not uncommon for those gases to go missing from the registry as they go through the process. And so the worst part about this is with only 15 million pounds of gas, through all that work, all the cylinders, all the trucking, all the handling, all the testing, all the analysis, all the people involved in the process, no matter how hard we worked in 2020, only 15 million pounds, almost 16 million, I'll round up to make it sound better, made it back for recycle out of 600 million pounds sold into the aftermarket. That is a really powerful number. I'm going to take a minute and see if anyone has any questions for me on anything I've just talked about. Ray, anything?
Well, I keep hearing from you is that, no matter what we do as far as recycling, it just doesn't work because it all just goes into the atmosphere eventually anyway. And that's not just our conjecture, it's the EPA's. But the fact that it's still happening so much, it is interesting to see how you've switched over from being a recycling evangelist to a destruction kind of maniac. But the numbers don't lie.
Correct. The numbers don't lie. And I fought it for a long time.
Yeah.
And to put this in perspective, if we were to just take the whole 15 million pounds or 16 million pounds and put a price tag on it of around $4 a pound, we would spend about $64 million destroying all this refrigerant every year. That would be the cost for, collection, let's say called transportation, testing, consolidation, processing, destruction.
And who picks up that 64 million?
Well, the marketplace is already picking up a far greater number. In many cases, because mixed refrigerant is considered, a negative thing, and it is, it's not great. It does, you have to do all the shipping. Reclaimers will try to make their money back on mixed refrigerant by charging a high fee. Could be $7, $10 a pound. So the irony is we're already spending about $10 million on, the marketplace is already spending about $10 million on destruction.
So the $64 million is less than it would be if we were recycling.
Correct. Much less. Yeah.
And you've mentioned that the gases are destroyed at a molecular level. How is that done? If you can explain it real quickly.
Oh, Ray, you've been trying to get me to answer this to you forever. So
I'm really curious.
There's two types of technology. One is cement kilns, which are very, very accurate. And the other one is plasma arc destruction. And those also can be accurate. They just have to be managed a little bit better.
Okay. That's good. I'll accept that for now.
And I appreciate that because you've been pushing me on it. So Andy, the question is, why do you believe this to be the case? Why is it so low? Well, there's a bunch of things. Number one, once a recovery technician removes refrigerant, it's very hard to have eyes on them or the cylinder so that the person who paid for the recovery can ensure that the material is returned to a reclaimer. So even though the recovery numbers might be higher, the reclaim numbers represent what actually makes it back to reclaim. And so there's a handful of other discussions and arguments that could be, really extrapolate a lot more information through. But essentially that's the high level answer for that. Hope that makes some sense.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So we are talking about 13 gigatons of CO2 in the form of air conditioning and refrigeration related refrigerants. There is some in there. You'll see a high amount for foams. I actually think the number's lower, but I went with some industry numbers that I could find. And I think the foam number is significantly lower. This is a lot of emissions. This is a lot of emissions. Again, you have to dig deep in order to get this information. So what I did is I extrapolated the 2015 task force results from page 17 of that report. And I carried it forward. The published number in 2015, I believe, was twice as high. And I did some, fairly thorough calculations on refrigerant projects and things based on this right here. And that's how I came up with the 13 gigaton number. I feel comfortable with it. So, and I'm also estimating 10 years of emissions from all the cars, all the passenger vehicles in the United States. If it helps at all, 600 million pounds of refrigerant vented annually represent 3 times the amount of CO2 as all the passenger air travel in 2019. It's a really big number. So essentially, I don't believe I need to spend too much time proving the impacts, harmful impacts of refrigerant, but I wanted to have at least a mention of it. And I wanted everyone to be aware of the fact that the AIM Act, as well as 3 executive orders that were signed this year, and the phase out of the 3rd generation of refrigerants, which started, only about a month ago, all signal the fact that it's recognized that these refrigerants need to have better oversight, better governance. But no matter what governance the EPA puts in place, they're not going to mandate destruction. What we're suggesting is that destruction is just a better path for companies that are investing in their infrastructure to follow. Accumulate some amount of material if you want to safeguard your own supply needs, but it's not going to amount to as much as you have to worry about when we're only dealing with 3% or less of the market's supply comes from reclaim. So it's a really, really small number. And the thing is, ODS materials will have some type of offset valuation. You can generate what's called a carbon credit for them. California carbon market allows for that. And there are 2 carbon market companies out there, or 2 carbon market protocols that you can follow. So there's lots of options, and a lot of reclaimers already have these options in front of them. As a matter of fact, I don't believe anyone's here from Bank of America, but Bank of America had been evaluating this amongst their way smarter than me group of like asset governance people. And they determined about a year and a half ago, it's got to be 2 years now, that it was smarter to destroy the refrigerants than to recycle them because they didn't want to see them end back up in the environment. Once the EPA published that all refrigerants are vented, Bank of America now mandates that all refrigerants will be packaged up and sent to a particular company, and that company then goes through the destruction process. And it really wasn't very costly for them to do it. If there are any refrigerants that they can generate revenue from by selling offsets, they use the offset credit to cover any additional expenses related to the program. And I asked Bank of America if they would roll that back or if they were happy with it because they were past the year mark. And they said they were very happy with it and they were going to stick with it. So They had at least one opportunity to turn back during the budget cycle, and they chose not to. One of the things we're most excited about, and some people on this call have heard me talk about it, is a project started under a Rotary International group. Now, Rotary, for those of you who don't know anything about Rotary, and I'm a Rotarian, so let me just put that caveat out there. It is one of the most community-based, one of the best run community-based charitable organizations in the world. When Rotary raises money in 2021, what they do with it is they take all the money that they raised in 2021, they put it in the bank, and they invest it for 3 years. And no money that's in the Rotary bank can be touched for that 3 years, so that it generates enough income to cover the administrative costs for everything that Rotary does. So any charitable donation, any money that Rotary raises goes into this fund. This fund then becomes protected for 3 years. Then ultimately that money for 2020 will be reinvested in 2024 back into the community programs. And they've built up enough of a reservoir of reserves that they can keep this process moving. So what that means is 100% of all of the donations to Rotary go to a project. They don't get absorbed by overhead or payroll. Almost everybody in Rotary is a volunteer. I'm a volunteer. I can tell you that there's over 100 other volunteers who are participating at the same level that I am on just this environmental side. There's 1.2 million Rotary members globally who all are aware of this project. And there's a lot of great things that can come from Rotary being part of this. Now, if you follow the business as usual approach, gas will go back, it'll get reused. You can see that process up here. Once the ODS materials are back and they're recycled, they go back into use. They're going to get vented if they don't go to reclaim. It would be nice to assume that this was a closed loop, but it's really not. Now, under this new program that Rotary's supporting, now Rotary is not a reclaimer. They're not a carbon generator, carbon credit generator. They're not a project manager. Rotary is just taking donations on refrigerant, ensuring that those refrigerants are destroyed, and then taking the revenue from those offset credits that are generated and using it to reinvest in the community. So the money isn't going to buy cars, boats, airplanes, or any of the other things that people can buy with their money, but it is going to help communities all around the world. Now, as I mentioned, it's a leading charitable organization. What we are intending to do, and I say we as though it was mostly me, it's not, there's a lot of people here, is provide donors with visibility to the process along the way so that they're not blind to what's happening. And 100% of the eligible refrigerants that come through for destruction will be destroyed. And then sometime within 12 months, those materials will be, the revenue will be generated from the offset credits, and then the money returned to this group in Rotary called Srag, which stands for Environmental and Sustainability Rotary Action Group. So the founder of Srag is a woman named Karen Kendrick Hands. Karen, wonderful person. Clary is the director of the refrigerant program. You might think that I would want to be the director of the program, but it's a really time-consuming process. Clary's wonderful. She does a terrific job. I'm here as an advisor to help and support, and really to talk to people that we work with and evangelize. And I don't really like to use this word. You'll never hear me use it, but I'm going to today. I like to evangelize the idea that by destroying refrigerants that have provided a great value for a long time, there can be a lot of good done for the community. So we can turn these harmful refrigerants into positive environmental and community-based outcomes. So how does it work? It is a stewardship program. And it's a reliable way for people to get eyes on the destruction process. Normally, it's a blind process. You turn your refrigerant over to a reclaimer, and then sometime in the next 6 to 12 months, they destroy the refrigerant and generate a carbon credit. But you don't know anything about what happened to that refrigerant after you've turned it into that. But this is really supposed to be something that makes everybody feel like they're part of something successful. So Srag will manage the financial returns for all these eligible refrigerants. At TrackRef, we're donating our time and resources to help track these materials digitally. So that's not costing Rotary or anybody who goes through this destruction process anything. The concept here is, let's do something great with these materials. They should be gone after 27 years. To put this in perspective, every pound of refrigerant that comes into the market this year will be vented, whether it's vented this year, next year, or in the next 27 years. It will ultimately be vented unless we destroy them at some point along the way. Plus, destroying them quantifies the end of life, and it certifies that they'll no longer be available for venting. So how this little revolution will work. We're going to have these CRTs through the carbon market. The payments will come back to the Srag group and Rotary. The Srag group is a 501c3 group. We can establish value for this, so a letter will be provided to anybody who donates refrigerant. There's a lot of positive press and a lot of community-based metrics that can be beneficial to any donor here. We don't want these refrigerants to go back into service if they don't have to. And this will help fund a bunch of Rotary projects as well. Essentially, after 27 years of doing this and seeing how reclamation fails to be able to capture enough refrigerants or create a behavioral pattern that stops the venting, this is one of those moments that anyone who's got a pound of CFCs can feel good about. And when CFCs are done, I guarantee you HCFCs are right behind it, and HFCs will be behind those as well. So if we can start to generate a change or make a behavioral change about what we do with these refrigerants, we can have a really positive impact on the marketplace. And I'm excited to say that although Bank of America is not a donor to the Srag program or even a TrackRef client, we are familiar with each other. We do talk to each other, and we are excited to see that they are having positive impacts. All right, the idea here is move beyond just the compliance risk of, what do you do with your refrigerants, but, enhance your community footprint and awareness. And oftentimes people who've got any type of inventory of CFC material will know it's like a hot potato. You want to make sure you get rid of it the right way, and you want to send it to somebody who's certified. And there's tons of great reclaimers out there. The only difference with Rotary is that money, instead of going to, profit somebody's bottom line, and we're not against profit at all, because each of those, we hire reclaim companies to do this work for us. We hire carbon offset market companies to generate the carbon credits and go through that process. So we're still hiring all those people. The difference is the extra profit that's generated on top of that will go back into community-based programs. So, all right, in addition to the things that I've said, some of the things that are beneficial here are some guidance on best practices in refrigerant management, some co-branding opportunities. I would advise and suggest that metrics on corporate sustainability reporting would be very valuable here. And more importantly, networking opportunities. Oftentimes you're networking with the reclaimer. There's nothing wrong with that. I was one for 20 years. I really believed in it. But it's a different type of group of people that you interact with when you're doing things for the community. This is a workforce of people that want to share your name in a positive way with other entities and let people know that there are positive things that can come from these refrigerants, and that you're essentially a leader if you participate. And if you can think about it like this is essentially the sustainability spectrum. This is a very new business model with a whole new group of stakeholders in it. And I know Ray and I have talked. One of the things, and Ray, I think this is my last slide. It is.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talked about is it wasn't until 1979, Ray, that Rotary got involved in polio.
That's when they administered the first vaccines down in the Philippines, correct?
And so globally, the vaccine had been available for nearly 30 years. No, 20.
No,
20.
the 50s, mid 50s. Yeah.
Yeah, so
So
20 years.
24 years.
And so for 20 odd years, the world had a chance to solve polio on its own. And the world had plenty of doctors and medical institutions around the world. Everybody knew how bad polio was. But it wasn't until 1979 that Rotary was involved with polio. And I've heard Clary say it before. She sees refrigerant destruction as one of Rotary's next polio type success stories. And the reason I believe she feels that, I'm sorry I didn't have time to invite her today. I know she would have loved to have been here. But the reason that she feels that way is likely because the marketplace has had 27 years to manage these CFCs, and we haven't. But almost very similar in time frame to the polio engagement. But I'm happy to tell you that as of today, there is only one case of the active polio in Pakistan. I checked before the meeting. And by the way, that includes Yemen. So we still have, as Rotarians, we still have active team members out there delivering polio vaccines in war zones to make sure that polio is eradicated. So with that same type of commitment, I really feel like Rotary can be a great partner for the refrigerant industry in creating this new model of what to do with refrigerants at the end of their life. All right. Ray, how's that?
That's very good. It explains everything, especially it's not just a little bit of difference between recycling and destruction. It's an enormous existential difference. And it's you know, there aren't many voices calling for the destruction. Is that because the recycling industry still makes a lot of money recycling, reclaiming, and black marketing and all the other things?
You know, the recycling industry isn't involved in the black market.
Okay.
What happens with the black market is it might be maybe a guy who works for a company did a recovery job and he put it in a cylinder. His boss doesn't know what's in there, and he's going to use that 3 more times to service, you know, maybe even his mother or his sister. He's not doing it, you know, with the intention of venting it. He's just doing it because nobody knows about it, and it's free refrigerant. But really, the reclaim industry had a bunch of opportunities to fix this. The first opportunity they had was to allow reclaim to be labeled. There's actually no allowable label for reclaim. This is actually slowing down the state of California.
So when you say there's no allowable labeling of reclaim cylinders, does that mean if you put reclaim on a cylinder, you're somehow breaking a regulation? You need to take it off?
Yep.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I had it happen. I labeled, I don't remember how many, but it was probably 10,000 cylinders as reclaim. And wow. I had the packaging made by Worthington at the time. And I had to recall the entire thing. There is no allowable material category called reclaim. There is a process called reclaim. And once you go through the reclaim process, now you have virgin refrigerant. We're not even allowed to label it as X% reclaim, X% virgin. AHRI was squaring off with the state of California over this because California did not understand that although there was reclaimed material, it could not be labeled that way. So this is holding up the state of California, and AHRI is going to have to wrestle or deal with this issue. But you don't have to deal with it if you destroy it. You just send it for destruction. You don't need to think about it. So that's number one.
Okay.
And the second thing, which we're about to get into, but we're still 3 years away from it, is the labeling of cylinders. So cylinders are generic. They're unmarked. And as a result of that, nobody knows the origins of those materials. This has led to a really large black market in Europe. What is estimated to be a $250 million impact to I have to remember Chemours. I want to call them DuPont really bad. Chemours and Honeywell. So they lose about $250 million a year to black market refrigerants or illegally labeled refrigerants because we don't label cylinders that are disposable. So that's why the US government, the EPA, decided phasing out disposable cylinders was a good way to avoid the black market. For those of us who've been doing this for a long time, the CFC black market in the 90s was so prolific that really large names in this industry paid big fines. Some people went to jail, but there were constant, ongoing, active investigations by the Department of Treasury into illegal refrigerants coming into the US.
Wow. So how do we bring it around so that, I mean, it's a cultural shift. I mean, it's barely in the public discourse. How do we bring it to where it is, to where you want it to be?
Well, it's less about what I want. I think it's more about what's happening with people's options. If you ask the average system owner, some are savvy and they do a good job. So let's separate that group out. So they may take some refrigerant, send it off for recycling, and then use it in their own infrastructure throughout their useful life as time goes. They usually will be left with a surplus at the end in those kind of situations. And that group of people's pretty well prepared to manage this and handle it. Then there's another group of people that they largely rely on their contractors to manage all the refrigerants. And the contractors do their best, but they have limited control over all the outcomes. They don't have control over what the reclaimer does with the refrigerant. And so this group of people may feel like they're in the middle and they're victim to these decisions. And to a large degree, they are, because they're not the buyer or the seller. They're just the intermediary, or they're not the buyer or the destroyer, right? They're just handling it between those 2 points. Some of those companies take maybe a too active role and they reuse some of that material, even though they're not supposed to. The bottom line is, with 600 million pounds of gas being consumed in the United States every year, roughly 50 to 60 million pounds being recovered and recovered, and only 15 million pounds being recycled. If all we're talking about is destruction of 15 million pounds, then if that chart that I showed you would have led to significant ODS projects that would have led to significant carbon offsets, and that can be easily managed. We've proven that. Each year, the carbon offsets account, and those, for every pound in there, you can look up, there's 2 agencies that do these carbon offsets well. American Carbon Registry is one, and the Climate Action Reserve is another. So both of these groups, they have protocols. You follow their protocol. When you're done with the protocol and you checked all the boxes and your materials are audited, then you get a certified carbon emission reduction credit. Lots of acronyms there. And then that becomes sellable on the California exchange. The California exchange is the most important exchange in the US because it is the only exchange that has a limit and an allowance for carbon offsets, open market allowance.
And people tend to follow that California exchange because of that.
Well, there's no other, otherwise there's a voluntary market. Like we advise and help a company in Indonesia, and they have decided to go with destruction for everything. And they have a voluntary market. And I can tell you, just the other day, I think they sold 20 tons, no more, 70 tons of carbon offsets at $60 a ton or $50 a ton.
Wow.
And that was just one day. They do others. But the importance, and they're destroying everything. CFCs, HFCs, HCFCs, they don't care what refrigerant is. They package it up, they do the testing, they follow one of the protocols. And then once it's been destroyed, they go to the voluntary market and they sell these offsets. Because plenty of companies will buy offsets, even in the voluntary market.
Yeah, of course.
I can't believe there's so few questions. Fran, how are you?
I'm doing well. I was a little late to the show, so I'm going to want to go back and look at the first few slides. I apologize.
Not at all. It's nice
No
to have
problem. This will be an edited video up on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to say the whole thing along with an extensive blog, Fran, and everyone else.
Thank you. I was
Absolutely.
at our Rotary District meeting with the international president last Saturday night. And you've got my wheels spinning now.
Yes, that's another, what Fran and I participate in a returned Peace Corps workers group. I am not a returned Peace Corps worker. They were kind enough to bring me into their group. They probably felt sorry for me, but Fran is a returned Peace Corps worker. And then we also coincidentally are both Rotarians. So we run into each other pretty frequently. Roya, Chase, anything you want to ask? I don't see any other hands up. I'm happy to give everybody back a portion of their day. I hope it was valuable. Oh,
This was great. Somebody have a question? I can't see if anyone's got a question. I don't
Yeah,
see any in
this-
the chat or Q&A. Go ahead.
what do you got,
This
Fran?
is Graham. While I think the video would be useful, it would be helpful to me to get the slides themselves. Is that possible?
Always. We'll share these slides with everybody.
Okay,
Yes, absolutely.
Thank
We can
you.
we can even make it a handout with the blog.
okay.
Hey, Ted, Chase here.
Hey, Chase.
What is the future of extremely low GWP refrigerants look like for, HVAC systems? We know they're using CO2 in supermarkets, which has a GWP of 1, obviously. Are we going to have this issue for the next hundreds of years, or is there future refrigeration technology coming out that doesn't rely on these materials, or what does that look like?
Oh, well, I'm a bit of a cynic on this one, so throw some salt over your shoulder. But when you hear this answer, there's a certain value to fluorine-based refrigerants. They provide a high level of stability and easy maintenance. CO2 doesn't, not yet anyways. So I'm not as bullish on CO2 or large-scale ammonia. I think there'll be uses for those things. There already are. Lots of people are using them. But I think that, for instance, in the case of CO2, we'll have to change what the workforce does, right? And this dialogue is probably not the best place to have that discussion. But as it regards destruction, we won't be destroying CO2, right? If that gets vented, that's vented. But these other refrigerants, other materials like ammonia, we do have to treat them for destruction. There will not be a recycle market for ammonia, for instance. The small amount of recycling that's done for ammonia is largely around using the components of ammonia after it's been in use. I know because I tried it as a reclaimer. Andy, how does refrigerant leak from heat exchangers during service? Well, I don't know that it just leaks during service, it just leaks. There's a lot of joints on equipment. Those joints undergo lots of duress throughout their life. I can tell you as a 20-year veteran of that marketplace, usually when you take the used refrigerant out of a system that's had a lot of leaks, it's got a lot of acid in it because these refrigerants can convert to HF, hydrofluoric acid. And once you get HF in a system, it will start to eat away at corners and edges, and it'll deposit itself in oil. That oil will then become corrosive. Those corrosive materials then start to eat away at things like areas near solder joints. And those are places that you find in the heat exchangers. Hope that answers your question. All right, well, I hope many of you have stayed awake. Roya, did I keep you awake?
Uh-oh.
See that? Not everybody stayed awake. So, all right.
This is extremely helpful. Thank you, Ted. And again, this will be on the YouTube channel and as a blog as well with information that you can download.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I'll make sure everybody here knows is we're going to share the contact information for the Rotary International group, Srag,
Absolutely.
that you can reach out to. You can reach out to me. I'll connect you with them. There is no interest, no intent, no plan, no effort here to make a penny from any of these destruction projects at TrackRef. That's not what we're here for. We just think that Rotary's offering a really nicely thought out idea of being a steward of these materials and then promising to reinvest those monies that are generated into great community-based programs. Justin, we're able to take really any amount of material, even just a couple pounds. We have a process for everything. We don't want to make anybody feel like they have to accumulate a certain amount. Although I do have one client who I just found out has 30,000 pounds of R502. They weren't sure they should get rid of it. So that will be a very, very, very big project for Srag. So they will be hopefully donating all of it. I don't know what else you do with 30,000 pounds of 502. And the answer, Justin, is yes, hundreds would be very possible. And that would be really appreciated. Just to put an idea, even 100 pounds of refrigerant could be 500 tons of carbon. So that's pretty significant.
Very much.
All right. Justin, we'll make sure we reach out to you as well and connect so we can hook you up with the right people. All right, everybody, thank you for taking a few minutes to listen to us today. This is not just a passion project, but I think it's a great path for these refrigerants to follow. It's easily manageable, and you saw the reclaim numbers, which we will share with all of you. But they're also available on the EPA's website. We'll share the link with you there so you can find it yourself in the future. But you can always refer back to us. All right.
All right. Thank you, Ted.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ray.
So how's about we talk about those HFCs? Just read the facts if you don't believe me. Watch your leakage, disposal and recycle, it's key. Cause we can do this together if we all stand together.